House Republicans are now facing a wave of retirements amid dysfunction and infighting on Capitol Hill. The chairs of many important committees now say they don't plan on running for re-election. Major Garrett and Scott MacFarlane join us now. Major is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent, two of the best in the business. Great to see both of you gentlemen here at the table. Major, I want to begin with a conversation you had with retiring Congressman Patrick McHenry. Let's listen.
What we've engaged in progressively with social media and where we are now politically is that the loudest, stupidest person is viewed as the most conservative or the most progressive or liberal. It has nothing to do with policy, has everything to do with style, has everything to do with scoring political points or raising political cash. And so if that's the whole goal, then you can have loud, stupid people on the left and the right that define the whole party.
Yes, loud and stupid people dominating politics in the House of Representatives. Patrick McHenry is an example of what you were just talking about in the lead-in. He is one of 5 sitting committee chairs who are not running for re-election. Now, in his case, he would have been term limited out of his chairmanship of the Financial Services Committee, but he is part of a brain drain of House Republicans, people who are on the policy side of the spectrum, who want to do things done, who know you have to compromise to get things done, who are visibly and audibly frustrated by this dynamic on the left and the right. But let's be honest, for the governing majority in the House, this is a Republican problem. People who showboat, who make noise, who say things that are disconnected from potential policy outcomes, but nevertheless achieve status, fundraising, and some manner of political power. And I think Patrick McHenry is not alone in thinking, I've seen enough of this.
What about the new speaker, Scott? Is he someone who these members who are retiring feel like he hasn't changed the culture to protect them, protect their ability to be policymakers? Help us understand, going from McCarthy to the new Speaker Johnson, how it's changed or not changed Capitol Hill.
That margin for error sure stayed the same. You can only lose 2 or 3 votes on anything, or the bill or the action is stalled. And I'm not sure anybody knows how to navigate that, be it Kevin McCarthy, Mike Johnson, or if there's a successor, a successor. And what struck me most over the past few weeks as these retirement announcements came is that it's not just the committee chair people. It's the committee chair people who had prosperous futures ahead of them in this system. The chair of the House Energy Committee had waited her whole career for that chairmanship. Kathy McMorris-Rodgers, Washington State. She's retiring with time left ahead of that very powerful committee. But there's something else, perhaps more pernicious and telling about what's ahead. When you have only 2 or 3 seat margin for error, any 2 or 3 people can hold you hostage. They have veto power. And we became accustomed early, all of us did, to the Freedom Caucus members, the people I think Mr. McHenry would call noisemakers, using that power. But now it's everybody else, too. We have the New York moderates hold up a bill demanding a vote on a state and local tax issue. They're employing that veto power. And if the whole conference starts using it, I'm not sure what the speaker can do.
And as Patrick McHenry talked to me about, and this is on the takeout, which everyone will see later on this week, I said, is the House Republican Conference better off without Kevin McCarthy as Speaker than it was when he was Speaker? He said, no, it's worse off. I said, give me an example. He said, we've lost, meaning House Republicans, 5 rule votes since Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker. He said, Speaker McCarthy lost no rule votes. That's a parliamentary thing that is of great significance to the majority party in the House. Rule votes set the rules for what's on the floor. How does something get on the floor? Because the majority party decides. The majority party also decides what the rules are going to be. If the majority party cannot enforce the rules, the majority party cannot govern. And what Patrick McHenry said is it is now an ungoverning House Republican majority. Everything else is sidelined by that simple fact.
So help us understand here, where does the real power lie in the U.S. House among Republicans? You've covered House Republicans going back to your book, The Enduring Majority, Newt Gingrich, 1994. You're on Capitol Hill almost every day, probably every day. No weekends off for you. But, okay, if it's not Speaker Johnson who's the center of power, is it former President Donald Trump who's driving House policy and House Republicans? Is it some television personality? Who is the real power player?
Seems to be two big answers to that. First of all, it's decentralized, and if nobody's in power, that's how things stall out. That's how you lose rule votes. That's how you have no plan forward for funding Ukraine or keeping the government open come March 1st. But it's not lost on anybody that the policy preferences of Donald Trump are being employed by a sizable, if not definitive, number of House Republicans. They don't like Ukraine aid. Donald Trump says he doesn't like the border deal. Let's get rid of the border deal. Donald Trump doesn't seem to mind the idea of a shutdown. They're almost inviting shutdowns for a third time in 2 weeks. So it's pretty clear where a focus of power is. Just not sure anybody really has enough to exert.
And what feels like the inevitability of a Trump nomination to lead the party encourages, if not incentivizes, every House Republican to calculate every vote on any matter, whether it's legislative or procedural, through the prism of will this or likely or not likely create a primary campaign against me. All of that flows through the Trump wing of the party. All of that influences every House Republican, whether they're in leadership or rank and file.
And we're on the eve of congressional primary season. I mean, it starts in a matter of days in states like California. You can't get outflanked to the right now, not at this time in the calendar.
Does President Biden use this as part of his reelection campaign, this whole scene in the House GOP?
Oh, I think as a side issue, there are going to be bigger issues: abortion, the economy, democracy. But as a side issue, dysfunction, chaos, ungovernability, and a sense that even with a majority that they beg the country to give them, they don't know what to do with it.
And where are House Democrats? Is Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, is he building ties with Johnson, or is it just a standoff way far apart?
House Democrats will tell you Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic caucus are why the government's still open, why the debt ceiling wasn't breached, why all the blocking and tackling of government through the House is happening with a Democratic majority of votes on all these big bills. I got to tell you something to watch next week. March 1st is the first of two deadlines for a government shutdown. 1/3 of the government shuts down March 1st. The other 2/3, including the Pentagon, March 8th. It's almost as if they're willing to flirt with the first shutdown because the bigger stuff comes March 8th. That's going to be an issue. I think they may be more willing to breach this first deadline because it's smaller and because they've come so close 2 times already.
Think about this. The House Republicans, if they have a campaign slogan to keep the House Republican majority, it has to be something like this: re-elect us so we can share power with Democrats. That's the reality. That is how much they have, their own internal divisions have forced them to cave to an agenda that they don't actually prefer, because it's the only way to keep government functioning.
Sounds like a parliament. What's the actual majority now for Republicans with all these retirements and exits and George Santos?
It's fluid, isn't it? They got to fill another seat that was vacated by a Democrat near Buffalo. It should be a 3 votes to spare majority with George Santos' seat now flipped. But that's not a tenable majority. I mean, if you give 3 people veto power in any organization, be it the Youth Soccer League or Congress, they're going to employ it to get what they want. And I think Mike Johnson's up against it.
The politics of the Youth Soccer League, we'll leave that for the next American.
Or condo boards. Stay away
Garrett
from them.
and Scott MacFarlane, thank you.